resistance from behind. Time we stop. Hey, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down.
I was raised a blue young nigga doing bad shit. Talk much shit cause I never had shit. I can remember being whooped in class. And if I didn't pass, mama whooped my ass. Was it my fault? Mama didn't plan it out. Broke out, left me to be the man of the house. I couldn't take it, had to make a profit. Found a block, got a Glock, and I clock bricks. Making G's was my mission. Moving up for this shit to get my mama out the kitchen. And why must I sock the fella? Just to live laws like Rockefeller.
Hey, hello everyone. I think we're live. Hello Ulrich, how are you? How you doing, Ulrich?
I'm fine, and you?
Yeah, doing excellent. Look, we're still waiting for
I'm doing
Giacomo.
fine. I'm excited to.
We're still waiting for Giacomo, who should come in a minute.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, basically, what can we say? We're starting this second roundtable, and basically in this new episode, we're gonna keep doing what we do in this program. That is to say, we push forward Plan B Network educational mission by demonstrating the impact of Bitcoin on the world and by fostering learning around sovereign technologies. So, what is going to be our agenda today? Well, I think we're gonna be, okay, let me share the screen. All right. Today, we're going to be discussing money, violence, and war. And each segment of this episode will help us uncover how our monetary system shapes our expression of violence and modalities of war. So we'll start this exploration in the good company of Giacomo Succo and yourself. I mean, you guys are well versed in the history of, in the study of history and Austrian economics. I mean, really, I can't wait to follow your reflection on this very thorny question. I mean, the plan today, oh, here is Giacomo. Giacomo is coming.
Hi, everybody.
So that's cool. Hi, Giacomo.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, great to have you, Giacomo. How are you doing?
Fine, thank you. Fine, thank
you. Yeah, fantastic that you could make it. I mean, I was just saying that you were about to come. I have to say we are super grateful to have you today, knowing the kind of globetrotter you are. I think you've been fairly busy traveling quite a bit lately, right?
Yeah, right. Now I'm just coming back from the Tokyo conference, where we are examining the opening of a new Plan B network node in Tokyo. And now I'm back to Lugano, where we are preparing for the Plan B forum of Lugano. And shortly, in a couple of weeks after the forum, I will go to El Salvador. So yeah, I'm not bored, that's for sure.
Yeah, so Plan B is expanding in quite a few directions, right? In terms of the network of the nodes, but also in terms of the curriculum, right? The production of the courses and their translation in quite a few languages, right?
Correct. From the geographical point of view, we just had a strong partnership with the new node in Taiwan, and we are expanding in Asia and keeping expanding in South America. We don't create new stuff, we try to federate existing stuff. So the idea is just to try to not reinvent the wheel and to give the best practices and the network effect to initiatives that are already happening in hotspots. And as you're right, from the curriculum as well, there are new courses every week, and there are new languages of translation. And the team of the Cover Bitcoin is doing an amazing job at that.
Cool. Here, I think you're probably discovering Ulrich from me for the first time. Is joining us today for this great conversation on money, violence, and war. I was just saying that this is only the second episode of the Bitcoin Roundtable, which is really contributing to your mission, to Plan B Network's educational mission. We're providing a different modality of learning, through conversation, presentation, different segments, which complement nicely the sort of curriculum-based education that you're providing through your courses.
It's the original method of education since Socrates. So yeah, it's also
Good.
part of the deal.
Now I'm going to switch back to this view. I was just saying that we'll start the conversation with the company of you two guys, who are both quite versed in the study of history and Austrian economic. I mean, I'm really waiting to get your views on this thorny question. And our plan specifically is to delve into Salerno's Money, Sound and Unsound. That's this book, right? And then dig deep through the strata of mankind history to uncover the birth and evolution of the concept of private property. Now, following this, and that's not something that's going to happen today, but people will be able to watch it in the coming weeks. We'll have David Saint-Onge on board. He is our very own numismatist, is a coin collector, and he'll be back on duty with plenty to share with us on the very close connection between money and war. Then we'll have Roxy join the third segment to highlight key learning resources available for free in dozens of languages on Plan B Network platform. And in this particular segment, he will exchange a few words with Damien Tellier, a professor of philosophy, a core classical liberal who, as a young adult, crossed the Atlantic and joined the Mises Institute to rediscover France's best liberal thinker. Now, finally, and that will be the last segment of this episode, Agelex will welcome Gloire. Gloire is a leading Bitcoiner from the Democratic Republic of Congo. He's a strong Bitcoin advocate and educator through the continent, and relentlessly is fostering Bitcoin adoption in his country. Now, what's really interesting is that Gloire lives in this country, which is very violent, where there's a lot of conflict, a lot of armed groups, and so he can share with us his experience of all the benefits of using a tool such as Bitcoin in such a complicated environment, right? So that's about it. We've got this topic, complicated, money, violence, and war. And you might say, okay, why, Jacques, are you choosing this green theme? I mean, we are bombarded every day, saturated with information on ongoing conflict and wars. Why should we care? Well, there's this quote adapted from Leon Trotsky that says, you might not be interested in war, but war is interested in you. And it's true. I mean, war creates a sort of massive vortex that sucks everybody in, warmongers and pacifists alike. Now we're on the verge of the Third World War. Who could have guessed things would escalate so quickly? So, I mean, the time is now. And the three of us, but all the Bitcoiners, can't wait to refine their understanding of the role of money in all of this. I mean, to what extent does the form of money we use shape conflicts? How does the landscape evolve when money changes? Are we delusional ourselves when we claim that Bitcoin can alter the dynamics of war and violence? And are we credible when we declare that it will pave the way for more sovereign individuals and more independent nations? That is precisely the sort of concerns that we will delve into today. Now, before we kickstart our conversation, Giacomo and Enrich, can you introduce yourself and perhaps sharing with us what in your life, personal, professional, sort of prompt you or triggered your interest for this particular topic? And maybe you can add, okay, why do you think it is a subject that matters a lot, and why we should definitely try to understand it better, not just theoretically, but also pragmatically? Do you want to respond to this, Ulrich? Maybe say a few words about yourself first.
Yeah, sure. So, so my name is Ulrich Fromy, so I'm French. So I work in France. I am a museum director, so a museum about prehistory. So I run the museum, and I studied history and prehistory for a long time, so up until a master degree. And I've been working in heritage, history related field for a long time. I'm a Bitcoiner. I've been a Bitcoiner for a number of years now, and from history, I'm very interested in economics and geopolitics. And when you start to understand how the world works, how money works, you start to realize that there's only one thing that can save you in this in today's world, and that what thing is Bitcoin. And as you said before, this is very true. We are living in a world that is getting more and more tense. I don't know if we are on the verge of a third world war, but we are certainly in a world at war right now. So conflicts are emerging everywhere, and I think that now more than ever, individuals, people need to think about how to protect themselves against seizures, against possible war coming back on in certain countries, because when you are at war, it doesn't matter if your country is losing or winning, because in both cases, you are losing your property. So that's why it is a big subject today.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Uli. Giacomo, a few words about yourself, although everybody or most people will know you, but it's always good to remind, and for newcomers, a few words and your thoughts about the relevance of this topic, despite all the bombarding every day on it.
So about myself, I think that my life was characterized before Bitcoin by a lack of focus. I wanted to be an archaeologist, so I did classical studies. I was passionate about ancient history, especially. Then after my high school, I was so bored with classicalities and humanities that I decided to start studying physics. So I did my degree in theoretical physics, but then I was so bored about theoretical research that I wanted to do startup stuff in the fintech realm. So I started to work in the payment industry for a few years in Accenture as technology consultant. So all the time I had this urge to reinvent myself until Bitcoin. That in the winter of 2012, December 2012, struck me as something so multidisciplinary within itself. Then it's suddenly enough. It's a place I can stop, because within Bitcoin there are so many things to explore, so many angles, the technological one, the ideological one. And in particular, I was passionate about Austrian economics before Bitcoin. That's actually one of the three ways I discovered Bitcoin. I discovered Bitcoin in December 2012 in three ways. I was part of this activist group about like a left-leaning group about privacy, like WikiLeaks, left libertarians, and they started to talk about Bitcoin. Then I was part of the group translating for Mises Italia from the Mises.org, and they were talking about Bitcoin with the first Surda Corda debate about Bitcoin as digital gold. And then people started to talk about technology of Bitcoin in my work. So I was basically stuck by Bitcoin. I think the argument is important because I think we are, to answer one of your questions in the slides before, we are credible when we talk about improving the money, fixing the money to fix the world and to fix the war. We are credible because of two reasons. One is very generic and one is more specific. The generic reason is that human interactions are what shapes the world. It's all about human action. And while human action can be non-economic in the Katalaki sense, non-monetary, can be just family actions based on affection and instinct or love, at scale, most interactions are either mass crime or market. And if you think about market, money is half of all the market all around the world. So to think that a bug or a problem, an issue in something which is just half of all the interaction that makes up any kind of scaled up interaction in human beings, it's obviously something important. And more specifically about war, there are very good arguments. Some of them are very well exposed in the book that we will going to comment, and the chapter that we're going to comment. And the argument is that specifically the broken money brings to war, basically, and the other way around, war brings to more broken money in a pervert, vicious spiral, which is what brought the world where it is today. So, of course, it's hyperbolic to say fix the money, fix the world. Bitcoin cannot fix literally everything. It cannot fix the human condition, but it can fix something that is at the center of the most relevant social construct ever, which is money. And it's especially relevant for war. So we don't have to be cynical and scoff at people saying that Bitcoin can stop the war. It's just a payment system. No. It's, if we are right about economics, which we will try to argue we are, fixing money can seriously, it will not eliminate human conflict or violence, but can change things at scale.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I think we can indeed be rationally optimistic, and the work, I mean, the presentation, the discussion, the exploration of the books and knowledge that we'll do today will certainly contribute to demonstrate that indeed by fixing the money will bring some degree of pacification in human relationships. So I guess the next point here we have is we need to frame our conversation, just specify the scope of it, to manage people's expectation. And maybe we need to first agree on some definitions. Do you want to look at them, Giacomo? Do you want to read them and say, if you're happy with them, okay, they might not be perfect, maybe you want to bring some nuance, but maybe they're a good starting point, right?
Sure. So you framed here violence, which is what we are going to discuss, as the use of physical force or power, threatened or actual, against oneself, another person, or against a group or community that either results in or has a high likelihood of resulting in injury, death, psychological harm, maldevelopment, or deprivation. So yeah, I think that it's a good starting point. If I can be pedantic a little bit, I think we can make a couple of caveats here. One will be the fact that this description can also fit with some kind of justified use of force that in the libertarian theory is often brought upon, like, for example, proportional defense, or even to some degree proportional punishment. So proportional punishment or defense can be a use of physical force that can actually cause injury or even death. So if you defend yourself. So I think that one thing that would be very relevant, and I think it is relevant to it's relevant to ethical theory, but to some degree, I think it's not really separable from economical theory. The difference between proportional defensive force and aggression, which I think will connect very well with Ulrich's talk and contribution about property, because what is the difference between aggression and defense? In theory, they are just, in an unethical world, they are just two objects influencing each other. It is the same. The asymmetry is brought in by, so what is the difference between I'm punching your face or you are hitting my hand with your face? The difference is in property right theory. That's the clear point. So I think that, I see that.
Yeah, I don't know what's
you lost my camera, right? You can still hear my voice?
Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah.
I will try to fix the camera, but in the meanwhile, I go on. The second possible caveat will be I will be very wary of the psychological harm point, because that seems like in trade-off with the physical force or power definition. I think that there was a lot of. Let me try to open another camera. Temporarily, let's stay here. Then we will see. I think that there are a lot of attempts to define something which is not violence from the point of view of property rights as violence, in order to justify actual violence to respond to non-violence. For example, you using the wrong pronouns is hurting me psychologically, so I can send cops to arrest you until you use the right pronouns. So that's a trick that is often played. So the use of the psychological part is very, very important. And I also think we should be very careful. I think it's very right to include likelihood of resulting in injury, because probably that one of the things that people may not be aware of all the time, but it's always true, probability distribution and probability theory is inevitably connected with ethics. For example, if I go around with a Colt with 6 bullets and I point it to your head and I shoot, then I'm basically murdering you. If I'm going around with some probability to have contracted some kind of coronavirus that may result in an increased death rate for your age group, then it's not exactly the same thing. And the probability of that passing between a fully charged gun to a partially charged gun, which is a Russian roulette. So playing Russian roulette to you is not the same as murdering you. It's less probability, and so on until we get to something which can be a purely probabilistical discussion like disease transmission. So that's the likelihood is a very good point that people often omits. And yes, this was very pedantic, sorry, but that's my.
So those
my
were your
caveat.
2 caveats. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Of course, we're not describing here the context, the motivation, and that sort of thing. Perhaps, Uli, I'll let you comment when we've done the other the definition. Or you want to make some input on this one, Uli?
No, I think that's pretty well said by Giacomo. Violence is something that you can talk a lot about violence, if it's legitimate or not, if it's exercised by the state or not, by an individual or not. So you can talk about it quite a lot, but I have nothing more to say.
Right. Okay. Next important definition: war. An organized armed conflict between nations or group within a nation aimed at achieving political, economic, or territorial goals through force. It involves significant violence, destruction, and can deeply impact societies governed by international laws, but varying widely in form and scale. So again, this is probably a very limited definition for war. What would you say about it, Giacomo?
I think that you said it's limited. You're right. In a way, it's also maybe too broad. I think that for the discussion of today, we will also imply some specific context of the modern warfare, the modern, let's say, after French Revolution, because I mean, when 2 tribes in Africa with like spears and rocks, they go to war, we can call that war. And I don't think that monetary policies and Bitcoin, fiat money can actually change that much in that scale. But when we talk about national conscription or something like, even before French Revolution, actually, if we talk about the 100 years war between French and England, in that case, political centralization at the nation scale and monetary issues, including debt issuance by the government, in that kind of, let's say, modern world, war is probably what we are going to address more.
Yes, yeah, very much so. Uli, you want to make a point on this or not?
I just want, just a point about the concept of war, because since the advent of fiat money, the world shifted not in regular wars, but more in total wars. And there's a big distinction to make between traditional wars and total war, because they are very different in the goals they are going to set in the war, the length of the war, and the destruction that is going to happen. That's very important, because we are going to talk about it later. But when war used to be financed, like before the First World War, by taxes, the goals were more restricted. The length of the war was shorter, and there was less civilian casualties that during World War I and World War II. And this is important because the total war ideology paved the way for totalitarian ideologies too, and all of this is linked with money, of course. And how you use money is going to define how you wage war. And
Yeah, so we'll talk about the scale, the intensity, the duration, and the level of damage inflicted by such wars. And finally, we've got this definition of money. So as Bitcoiners, we won't be satisfied with such a short definition, but I think maybe it can be helpful and sufficient and just to bring everybody on board in this conversation. So it's a medium of exchange, a store of value, and a unit of account that facilitates trade and economic activity. Key requirement for sound money, for good quality money, or scarcity, it needs to be durable, portable, divisible, fungible, socially acceptable. Does it work for you, Giacomo and Uli, as a starting point?
I have no objection. I think that the only improvement on this will not be a definition, would be dissertation. Like some of the discussion may be about what is considered money, that were like between M1 and M2 and M3 and money substitutes. So we will go too much in detail, and the only rational definition is this one. So I'm totally
okay. Cool. Well, so we're happy with the definitions. And so now we have to clarify the scope of the conversation, because just by reflecting on the definition, we understand that we have a potentially huge subject that would require really a titanic endeavor to explore comprehensively. I'm sure we could dedicate, I mean, Giacomo, you like to be stimulated intellectually. Here is another subject you can dedicate your life to. So we've got a few hours only. What are we going to be focusing on? What are we also parking aside maybe for another day? The conversation we're about to have is going to be structured as follows. In the first part, Ulrich and Giacomo will carry out an inquiry into the cost of war, its financing, how this cost is being hidden from the public, and also how the war economy paves the way for economic fascism. And so we'll draw from Salerno's book, Money, Sound, and Unsound. We'll talk about it later. Now, Giacomo, then you will basically support Ulrich in his attempt to draw some kind of genealogy of the concept of private property. Well, because property really is something we need to address, I guess, in this talk. When you find yourself in conflictive time, one of your top priorities is indeed to find out how you can best protect, save, and preserve your property against theft, confiscation, destruction. So with Uli, in this second part, we'll track the evolution of the notion of property from its prehistorical infancy to its modern expression in the information age. And finally, we'll build upon those first two pillars and we'll look into Bitcoin, the apex property. We will unpack this seemingly presumptuous idea and measure the extent to which Bitcoin obsoletes prior forms of property and alters the dynamics of war and violence. Are we okay with this structuring of a conversation, Uli, Giacomo?
absolutely.
Okay, so that's going to be our focus. There are, of course, as we've started to allude to it, quite a few aspects that we won't be able to touch upon, although maybe we can evoke them and discuss them quickly by the end of the conversation. And that everything that has to do with the ongoing economic wars, the war waged by the states against their citizens, the war on privacy, the cultural war, all the propaganda, the political destabilization, which is also very much an act of war and violence. I mean, all of this is extremely relevant, considering what's happening today, notably. But I think for today, for the sake of doing something relatively in-depth and still very significant, we'll park them aside today. Okay with you guys?
Absolutely.
Okay, so now let's move on. We're starting with this book, Money, Sound, and Unsound. That's the title of the book that will guide the first part of the conversation. Giacomo, can you introduce this book to us? Why is this book so important? Can you say a few words about the author?
Yes, so Salerno's book is very important because it's basically a collection of some of Salerno's essays and papers on Austrian economics, and especially on Mises. Salerno is basically reproposing, reframing, rediscussing many people's ideas from Thoreau to John Law, but mostly the key is Misesian. Is a stricter follower than Mises than many other Austrian. I think this book is very important because while I consider most of the foundations of what this book explains already present in Mises' work, there are two reasons this book is probably necessary to understand better the points that are touched. One, Mises' work is hard. If you guys listening are try to start from the human action, you may have a lot of intellectual satisfaction, but that's not an easy read. The style is not super
Right.
flowing. It's hard. It's a hard book. I think Salerno's Salerno's book is just easier to read and to frame the question. But the second difference is just chronological. This book came out many years after Mises' work and is taking into consideration most of the objections to Mises' work, most of the framing of Mises' work, like even inside the so-called Austrian economic school, there was the Hayek kind of fork of the Mises tradition in many regards, especially money, the strong opposition between traditional gold standard proponents and free bankers like for example Selgin was already present in Hayek, and of course the current debate comes after the loss of Mises' position in the cultural debate. At least we hope it's temporary loss, and maybe it may be changed by Bitcoin, ironically. But so far, Keynesians and monetarists like Chicago boys, and if they were Austrian, the Austrians of the Hayek variants won the debate. Keynesian won. Basically, we could say that Marxists and Keynesians won the global debate, and within the conservative or free market opposition, Chicago boys and monetary school, supply side economic won the internal debate, and against the Austrians. And within the Austrian school niche, Hayek won against Mises in a sense. So this book comes after all that, trying to rebuild, to clarify why original Mises' position were rational. And I think that, as I said before, money is the most important thing at scale, not because other things are not important, but because other things are important only at local scale, your family, your happiness. But at the world scale, money is the most important thing. And this book is about money, and this book is about the restoration of the proper theory of money after many years from the foundation has been laid off by Mises. So yeah, I will actually start from these, and then when you go to get more in depth, go back to Mises. And Mises' theory is very important because, especially, I'm going to anticipate a little bit what we're going to discuss in the third block. But in a way, Mises' theory is also an anticipation of Bitcoin maximalism. It's about the fact that sound money is not just about freedom to choose money. It's that, but it's also some prescriptive characteristic of money as scarcity and there are many things to say. But in general, a great book to read. And one chapter, the chapter 9, is a great summary of the specific discussion about violence and money that we're going to have.
Totally. Thanks. Uli, a few words on it? Do you want to add a few words, Uli, on this?
Yes, Salerno is quite important right now in the Mises Institute because, first of all, he's the academic vice president of the Mises Institute, and is someone in my mind that is very good to summarize all of the Mises point of view about money and economics, and is also following closely the Rothbard, which founded the Mises Institute in the decades ago. And one thing that I like quite a lot about the books is it's quite a long book, but it's well written, and it's very easy to understand all the concepts about Australian economics. And as Giacomo said, Serrano is the heir of a long tradition with Rothbard, Mises, and Menger, and is following the more traditional line of the Australian economics. And it is a great way to start Australian economics with 2 days Salerno and to go back up and to Menger to say that because when you start with today's work with Salerno, you can understand why Hayek shifted in the 40s and 50s, and why Menger and Mises wrote about what they wrote. So I think it's a great book, and the chapter 9 of the Money, Sound, and Answer, there's a lot of concepts of Australian economics, like capital theory and so on, that are quite interesting to read about.
Right.
So it's a very good chapter.
Yeah, so we're going to be diving in this chapter 9, which is really the key chapter. I mean, when I was preparing this program, I was sort of asking people, okay, what should I focus on? And I say, okay, this book you need to look into it. You need to focus on this book and on this chapter 9. By the way, this book is available for free as a PDF on the Mises Institute. I've just put the link in the description of the video, so you can already go and fetch it. And you will find out, just like Giacomo said, that it's not necessarily a super easy book. It might be far easier than Mises, but it's still 600 pages, 650. And I looked at it, I've read this chapter 9. It's super interesting, but it's still written in kind of an academic. I mean, it's quite technical. It requires some preliminary economic knowledge, which we build gradually when you become a Bitcoiner, but it's not necessarily for everybody. And I think that the gift of this the conversation that you're joining today is precisely that you guys are going to make the key notions of this chapter accessible to us. So we're looking at chapter 9, War and the Money Machine, concealing the cost of war beneath the veil of inflation. And again, the key principle that we'll be addressing, that Uli will be addressing with Giacomo, are 1, the true cost of war; 2, 3 ways of financing war; 3, inflation, hiding the cost of war to the public; and 4, war economy, the road to economic fascism. So Uli, shall I let you guide this conversation now with Giacomo around those 4 themes? Are you okay?
Yeah, sure.
So I'll just give you the floor. Yeah. Go on.
Yeah, so one thing to talk about before talking about the chapter and the true cost of war in my mind is to understand how capital structure works in Australian economics, because when you understand how capital structure works, you understand how war is devastating and is going to destroy far more than the body of a man and militaries and so on. So you can intervene when you want, Giacomo, to correct me or add something. But in Australian economics, the society and economics is built on capital structure, and the capital structure is very important because it determines the output in economics, and it determines the standard of living people are going to live on. And the capital structure is something that is very time intensive, and it is something that is very closely related to money and how people are going to envision and to live their life if they have a low time or high time preference.
Okay. Let me interrupt you. Let me interrupt you a minute. Let me interrupt you a minute. Let's say capital theory or capital structure doesn't mean anything to me. Like it doesn't resonate in my brain because I don't have that access to that sort of knowledge. how would you make it simpler? Because I understand that to make the most of all the notions that are going to be presented in this chapter, it's important to understand this theory of capital by the Austrian economist. Is there a way to make it accessible to everyone? Like using simple images?
There's a lot of ways that you can make it simple. There is the famous example that was used by Milton Friedman about the pencil. He was showing a pencil to a journalist, and he was saying that an individual, one man, one woman, cannot by himself or herself build from scratch the pencil. So he needs other people, other individuals, to cut down trees, to make the graphite, etc., etc. And those other people building the other stage of production are people that are going to contribute a lot of their time, a lot of their capital to build what Austrian economics are going to call the capital structure of society. And with this example, it's very easy to understand. There's another one that is very often quoted by Austrian economics. It is Robinson Crusoe. I don't know if you know about this guy, but the thing is, to put it simply, if you are left alone on an island like Robinson Crusoe, you have to fend for yourself. So you have to eat, you have to hunt, you have to get shelter, you have to protect yourself, and you have to spend time to do those things. So if you are Robinson Crusoe and you are going to I don't know, to gather berries or going to hunt the wild boars. You are going to spend time doing that, but the time you are going to spend hunting or gathering is time that you are not going to spend doing something else. And one day, let's say that Robinson Crusoe is going to build the spears or to build something to get more coconuts. He is going to build a stage of production. Is going to, is going to have a low time preference, to consider the future and how to make his production more efficient. So before doing that, before building something, he has first of all to save, because those stage of production is going to take time. If you are going to build a tool to make your life easier in the future, you have first of all to save, because you have to take the time to do the tool. So let's say you are on an island and you are picking berries, but you are not satisfied by the way you are doing that. So you want a tool to make it easier. So you're going to save berries, because you have to build your tool during 1 or 2 days. So you are building saving in a way. And the saving part is very important, because for Austrian economics, without saving, there's no investment possible, and we're going to talk about that later. But you are going to build your tool to make your life easier in the future. And while you are doing that, you are, in a sense, going to complexify, to make the stage of production longer and more efficient. And this is very, very important, because in the example of Robinson Crusoe, when he's on his island, he's not alone, because one day he's going to meet one other guy. Let's say Friday. I think the name was Friday, and with that guy, he's going to also exchange tools with him. Maybe Friday has another tool that Robertson wants to go fishing or something like that, and he's going to trade. And this example is quite interesting, because when you are building your first tool to make your life easier, you are going to free up more of your time to build another tool, and so on and so on and so on. And when you are going to be with a lot of individuals, you are going to exchange. And just one last thing that I want to say about this quite simple example about the building up of a capital structure. The example of Robinson Crusoe is very important, because it explains quite a lot about Australian economics, because there is the uncertainty about the future. that you can also derive from the example of Robinson Crusoe, because when you are left alone on your island, you don't know how you're going to eat, so you don't know your environment, and you don't know what the future holds for you. So there's the inherent uncertainty about the future. And with that in mind, you are going to act. Like Giacomo said, the principle of human action is what drives Australian economics. And with this uncertainty, you have to do something. So maybe you are going to go hunt, gather coconut, or go fishing. So you have to make a choice. And this choice is subjective and individual. So maybe Robin's going to fish, but we don't know. And after that, and just yeah. And just the last
just to
thing I
make
wanted
sure,
to say,
just go on.
no, just the last thing I wanted to say that is very important is that to envision the future, you have to save. So if you want to build a tool to make your life easier to gather coconut, primarily you have to save, and this saving is going to be important to invest in the future.
Okay. Giacomo, do you want to add something? I mean, in my view, it's all about the flourishing of mankind. If we want mankind to do something different than just trying to catch fish with their hands during all day long, they need to be creative. They need to allocate some time to develop new tools, etc. So that's an investment. It requires that someone provide them some food, etc. And then when they accumulate the tools bring them greater productivity, and they gain more time to venture into different or reason of human inquiry. Is that something about it or what?
Yes, I cannot add anything. Ulrich said everything, and in this example of Robinson, we can pack in all the important things about cooperation and division of labor and all this stuff. I think that I can just repeat in an even simpler way, very, very stripped down, following this image, because everything Ulrich said, I think, is very clear. But if you go to want even more summarized, just think about Robinson getting 2 fish every day with his bare hand, and that's basically his labor in order to do consumption. Then he will spend 1 day not eating, so he will make a sacrifice of consumption in order to keep the fish for the future in a pond, for example. And now he will have free fish for spending the time, instead of fishing with the bare hands, to build a fishing spear. Then he will get more fish, so he will be able to accumulate more saving, and then he will use more saving to build not just a fishing spears, but a fishing rod or a boat. So in this image you have here, you have the transition between the fishing spear up to basically the fishing boat with all the technology. And the fishing boat can provide so much output. And that's basically what these strange and difficult words are just this. Like capital is just the goods that you don't use to consume, but you just use them to extract other goods or other capital goods. So that's just capital. It's the things that you built, not because you can consume them, but because they will help you to extract from nature more stuff to consume. And labor is just the stuff that you have to do in order to achieve your preferences. And leisure is when you actually consume your preferences, your good, in order to feel happier and to follow your desires. So this seems like a very complex terminology. Even like time preference may seem complex, but it's just, the ant and the grasshopper, the very famous fairy tale. The grasshopper is spending all summer singing, so he's getting more joy in the present. But when the winter comes, in predictable future, as Ulrich was saying, the grasshopper will die because he didn't save for the future. The ant is sacrificing something in the present in order to achieve more in the future. That's time preference. So seems like a lot of complex terminology, but this is just the center of something that even the most, let's say, simple-minded fable is already teaching to children since the dawn of civilization. And that's the heart of civilization. And that's very relevant to war, because as we will see, war is going to especially destroy the capital structure and the capital stock.
Okay, let's move on. We're still in the introduction, Uli.
Yeah, sure. There's, like Giacomo said, like most in the structure of capital, most of it is used to make the production and the creation of the final goods, so the consumer goods, better, faster, and cheaper for the consumers. So there's this quote from Skuzen, who was an economist, that wrote in 1982, I think, The Structure of Production, which is a quite an interesting book that is quoted by Salernos in chapter 9. And he did quite an extensive study on how the capital structure of the USA is shaped, and he found out that 60% of the available productive resources and capital goods of the total goods in the society are used to make the structure of capital better to produce consumer goods. So you have 60% of all the wealth in the capital structure that is not consumed, that is used to make the last stage of production better, to make the best product for consumers. So you can understand the shape of it and how everything in a society relies on the higher stage of production. So the higher stages of production are all the things you don't see, like ore extraction, cattle, land, that ends up making, I don't know, a Big Mac from McDonald's. And this is quite important. And there's also something that I just want to touch on very quickly, because when you talk about capital, people have a misconception of what capital really means, because of Marxism, communism, and or it has not a good image today. But for Austrian economists, capital is very simple. Capital is just the sum of money equivalent of all assets. Like capital in a capital structure is just how capital goods are worth, what they are worth, and how entrepreneurs are going to exchange them for money. So money doesn't have money and capital are not tied, to say the least. They are only tied up together when entrepreneurs want to sell or buy capital goods. So they are just good, to say that quite simply. And there's also another thing, and Giacomo talked about it earlier, so I just want to add something, because when you talk about the capital structure of society, when you talk about capital, you cannot not talk about saving, income, capital consumption, because all of those are very important for Australian economics, because you can see the income as a flow, and if you are an individual or an entrepreneur, the income, you can overuse it. So you have capital consumption. So you're not going to invest in the capital structure. You can save it. So when you save your capital, you can invest said capital to make the structure of capital longer, more complex, and you can and this is quite. I don't know if we are going to talk about it later, but this is important because when you talk about time preference, about the structure of capital, we're also going to talk about the price of money, interest rates, and how money is quite important to make the structure of capital sound and quite sane, to say the least, because if entrepreneurs cannot rely on price signals to invest, the entire capital structure is going to be navigating in the dark, like Mrs. would say, and this can lead to what Serrano say, a retrogressing economy, because people don't know because the money is not doesn't reflect the value of capital goods. But I think we're going to talk about that later, so I'm not going to extend on that.
Anything you want to add on that, Giacomo?
No, very clear.
Okay, let's move on. The true cost of war. Yeah, so that's the first aspect of the of this chapter. I think there's a few notions. There's like in this first aspect, we look at different aspects really. So war and high time preference. Can you take us through these aspects?
Yeah, like as we talked before about the capital structure of society, you have to understand that you have to have a low time preference to make the capital structure of society better. So you have to save, you have to invest, you want your life tomorrow to be better. So you are going to delay your present consumption. When you are going to go in wartime, so when the government is going to wage war against another nation, the time preference of government is going to shift to a high time preference, because when you talk about war, there is a sense of urgency linked to it, and this is even more truer with total wars, because you have mass conscription, you have a lot of militaries to feed and to arm, to send to the front at the best speed possible to battle with the enemy. So the wartime is always going to be high time preference. And as Mrs. said, war can only be waged with present goods. So you cannot have the luxury of waiting for the capital structure of the higher stages to produce better and faster for in the next 5 or 10 years. We want the goods now. So that's very important, because today we, as Bitcoiners, we talk a lot about high time preferences, but you have to understand that during wartime, we are in a super high mode time preference. Everything has to be done for today. And when you talk, when you are in high time preference mode, you shift in something that we can say is capital destruction by overconsumption of capital, because all the consumer goods that are mostly used by civilians, we are going to divert them to the militaries, so the civilians are not going to join them, and all the money, the resources, the scarce assets like labor, ores, or I don't know, lumber, etc., that are used for civilian capital goods are going to be diverted to the military. And this is very important, because not only are you using consumer goods, present consumer goods for war, you are also going to deplete your capital structure to wage war. And the longer the war goes on, the more the capital structure is going to deplete itself. And you are not, and this is quite important, because the entire capital structure is going to be in very bad shape.
But I mean, Giacomo, when I listen to Uli, I can't help thinking about those pictures I've seen of those documentary made of the Second World War, when the America is engaging in the fight, and then it's indeed redirecting, reallocating all the resources to this war effort. And so you see, you basically, I see what you're saying, Uli, but is it still true today? I mean, this reallocation and this move towards a very short time preference, like you basically abandoning the production of goods that require a longer capital structure. Does it still apply today?
Well, yes, there are basically two forms of redistribution of resources. In the book, they are called, following previous authors, they are called the horizontal one and the vertical one. The horizontal is from some kinds of industry that cannot be easily reconverted in war effort. So basically, usually the metallurgic, siderurgic industry is already immediately hijacked into the war effort, while, for example, other stuff like touristic industry cannot be trivially reused. So you have this kind of horizontal distribution, and then this vertical distribution from the deep part of the capital structure to the shallow part of consumer goods. So everything moves to consumer goods, and I think this is still relevant. You can see that in Russia and Ukraine. You can see that to some extent in Israel and Palestine. You can see that also in current war situations. It may be hidden, though. For example, what is very interesting to notice is that there is some narrative. Think about the Cold War, for example. It was a war a warlike state, even if cold. And many people think that the achievement of the United States of America and the Soviet bloc during the Cold War were incredibly forward-looking. Like there is this myth like, oh, we don't plan for the future like we used to do during the Cold War, when Kennedy could bring us to the moon because there was this effort for the future. So the narrative could be that actually with the scare, with the stimulus of war, people will become even more forward-looking, building stronger and bigger things. But there, you just have to apply the typical Bastiat proviso to not just look at what you see, but also at what you don't immediately see. So yes, you may have the government shifting into some kind of long-term thinking to win the work. So that you can have DARPA creating the internet, you can have the space program, you can have stuff like that. But then what is the cost? These are resources that are taken away from the private sector, and the private sector, in exchange for this, had to give up a lot of future capital accumulation, a lot of structure of the process, of the industrial process, a lot of plans for the future. Basically, an important difference here is between positive sum games and zero sum games, or even negative sum games. Basically, which is also very connected with the concept of cost of war. So if my tribe wages war on your tribe, and we take your stuff, war has not necessarily a cost for me if I win, because the total benefit for me could be the cost of waging war and maybe the losses that I will suffer, but it will be compensated and maybe overcompensated by the loot that I will take from you. So in a way, I can gain from war. But if we do the sum of the benefits, if we try to sum it up, everything I gain is because you lost it. So any gain is directly connected with one loss. I think my webcam is down again.
Frozen.
Let me switch to the other one again. So every here it is. Every gain from somebody is also a loss for somebody else, and the total situation is a situation of loss. This is the same for time preference. Any gain in apparent low time preference for the government is in exchange of a loss of low time preference or forward-looking structure for the private sector. And we know that the incentive structure is such that the private sector, even if it's more chaotic, difficult to study, difficult to keep in your mind, so psychologically seems more entropic, but since the private sector is made by people with skin in the game and local incentives and local information, that can build a lot of more things than the government. So there may be the delusion that this situation is not current anymore, that war has not a cost, but even in a way, the true cost of war is important, because the Keynesian delusion, the Keynesian myth is that not just war is costing something to is not costing anything to the winner, because the winner is taking up resources. But even for the loser, war will create something out of nothing, because the war effort will push people, the typical Keynesian idea that with war you have full employment. So basically you are creating prosperity. So we have to remind all this stuff, because there is a myth that destroying the capital structure of society is actually to some degree gaining something, because people are only focusing on the present goods or the consumption goods, because you can see more consumption, but not this more consumption is not coming for free. It's coming at the expense of the capital goods that were going to allow you a greater consumption in the future. So it's all a zero-sum gain, or more often is a negative-sum gain.
Right. So that's the idea, that you may have some temporary economic boost due to this concentration of action on selected industries, etc. But the overall result is that you go on.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that. Go ahead. Okay, so I just wanted to say
very simple example. We are in sync. A very simple example for this hidden cost is a junkie. somebody with an addiction. You get some a lot of heroin. You feel good now, but that's not positive sum. That as at expense with something later. And monetary distortion we're going to discuss are very similar to drugs, heavy drugs. They may give you something now, and you may say, okay, how can I work so much without cocaine, kilos of cocaine? Well, the answer is you can't, but there is a good reasons you can, because you can get more job done in the long term, while boosting, it's like doping in sport. Boosting your performance now, apparent performance now, comes at the expense of your sustainable performances later. So it's all about time preference again. Sorry, Ulrich.
Yeah, no, just like the quote of Schumpeter's quote on the right of the screen is quite telling about that. Like, once the war is over, you are realizing that everything is devastated. So you don't have forest anymore. You don't have capital goods anymore for civilian use. Everything is devastated. But you only war, and if you are living in the Keynesian delusion, everything is great because you have full employment. The economy is thriving, kind of, and you can also think like a junkie, like you said, Giacomo, that the war is free because everybody has a job, companies are working, etc. But there's no free wars. And on the contrary, as Schumpeter says, after the war, you realize that you entered the retrogressing economy, like Serrano said, and everything was just a big general capital accumulation. So you are poorer than before the war. So it's always a negative sum game, because even if you are the winner of the war, you have, at the end of the war, you have to redirect your labor, you have to redirect capital goods, etc. So you are losing time. And you are poorer at the end of the war, even if you are a victor that you were at the beginning of the war. Because everything that happened during wartime is not only men dying in war, is also all the, as you said, all the unseen. So all the missed opportunities, the missed possibilities by the private sector to build a better future. So everything everything is lost forever. So you are always losing from a war.
And I guess this observation particularly applies to modern warfare and total warfare, because as long as you could just wage war with the mercenaries you had or your little troops, and you were paying with the amount of money, coin, gold that you had in your treasure, then it was fine. I mean, it was not like amputating the whole structure of your capital, of your whole countries. People were not really so much affected, right? So it's kind of, those are kind of modern considerations, right?
Yeah, I think you're right for two reasons. One reason is that in modern time we have a deeper capital structure, so we have more to lose. Two primitive tribes, they don't have much capital to lose, so the loot they extract from the war may be higher than the capital they destroy in doing so, because they don't have a very deep capital structure. That modern society have more to lose. But also, as you say, the point is that the typical war will be a typical war of the ancient war with professional soldiers paid with some money. It will have a feedback loop which is shorter. When it's clear that the destruction of capital is more than the possible loot, then everybody is going to perceive very clearly, okay, the win is starting to get lower than the loss. So this is not convenient anymore. So even if there is an ideological reason or whatever, for everybody it's very clear that the decision metrics is not giving back a positive result anymore. While with modern war, for many reasons, including the monetary reason, these costs can be hidden, and then we move to the next chapter of hiding the costs.
Excellent. Let's move on the next aspect, 3 ways to finance the war. And first we look at taxation and government borrowing. Oli, do you want to...
Yeah, sure. So in the traditional sense of of how war were waged in the past, like before World War I, let's say the last the last proper war that was founded solely on taxation was the Napoleonic Wars at the early of the 18th century. The government could only wage war as long as they had a treasury. So the war goals were obviously limited. The battle between armies were also limited, so there was more decisive battles. And once you lose a battle, you're going to sue for peace very quickly. And so the scope of the war was much more smaller. There was less civilian casualty, etc., etc. And one thing that is very important when you talk about taxation as a mean to finance a war, and this is something that we can talk about just a little bit, because taxation is not something that is that has a good reputation among Bitcoiners and Austrian economics, because this is seen as theft by the government. But one thing about taxation that you're not going to see with inflation is that taxation doesn't distort the price signal. Taxation does not is not as harmful as inflation as a way to finance war. Because when the government is taxing people, they are just going to divert and reshape the supply and demand ratio in society. Because private firms and private individuals and the government are always going to bid on the same market. And if the government is going to raise tax, they are just going to send a signal to people to lower the consumption, so the government can buy the things that they need to wage the war. So there are no there's no price distortion like we can see with inflation, and this is something that is very important to make as an example. I think.
Anything to add, Giacomo, on that?
When you talk about
No, nothing to add. Still, we're not saying that taxation is good. I think, but taxation at least is a honest. It's a honest bed. It's like I think that a good metaphor here could be people discussing being killed with a dagger or with an arrow. The dagger, you're still being killed, so it's still not good. But at least the dagger, somebody has to come close, and you can defend yourself easily. You can see that is happening. While the arrow was called a cowardly weapon because it can come from far away, you cannot see it. That's basically the difference here. It's still a form of taxation, especially under illegal tender and under a monopoly of money. It's still basically a taxation, but it's a stealth, ninja, hidden, coward taxation instead of a direct, clear taxation, which would be easier to manage in many regards. So I agree.
Okay.
Yeah, and just one thing I want to add about taxation is when the government is going to tax people, they are mostly going to tax incomes, not capital, not savings. This is very important because after that we're going to talk about government borrowing, capital is taxed. So it's not the same thing. When you are with taxation, you are stealing the present from people. So you're stealing their income that they use to live every day. And when you are during wartime or peacetime, when you are taxing your people, there's two things that can happen. First of all, people can lower the consumption. So they say, I have less disposable income, so I'm going to lower my consumption. I'm going to save the same amount at the end of the month. And the other thing that can happen is that people are not going to lower the consumption. They are going to lower the savings because people don't want, and that's quite understandable, they don't want to lower their standard of living because they have less disposable incomes, because you have children to feed, you have something like that. So the bad thing about taxation during wartime, because the government expects the population to lower the consumption, but it doesn't happen necessarily. And on the contrary, the consumption doesn't get lower, the savings get lower. And when savings get lower during wartime, it means that interest rates are going to get higher. So even government and private firms are going to be in big trouble because they're not going to be borrowing money as easy as before. And it's going to hurt the capital structure of society, but not as bad as inflation, as not as bad as government borrowing.
Right. And finally, there's inflation, which is the hidden.
And just
Yeah.
yeah, just before inflation. Yeah, just excuse me. Just before inflation, just let's talk about government borrowing, because Salerno talks quite a bit about it in his book, and he's quoting a work about it. So it's pretty interesting. When the government is borrowing from its people, they are going not to tap into incomes, but to tap into savings. And this is quite important, because savings, when you understand how the capital structure works for Austrian economics, you understand that savings is detrimental for the complexification of the capital structure, because this is why what private firms, private individuals are going to compete to get funds to make the capital structure better. They are going to compete for savings by individuals, because when you save, you're going to make deposits in the bank, which when in a sound banking system, we're going to call it a term deposit. And those deposits are going to be used by the bank to be loaned to entrepreneurs who are going to invest in the capital structure. But when the government is not only taxing incomes, but also borrowing from the public, they are competing with private funds for people's savings. And this is very bad, because it is going to hurt the capital structure even more than taxation. Because with taxation, people are going to consume less or save less. But with borrowing, the government is going to take the money away from private funds. And the capital structure is going to go into a halt, or is going to regress.
I think there is an interesting caveat here before
But
we
it's not
move
as
to
bad as
the.
inflation.
Yeah, I think there is an interesting caveat from in respect with the libertarian ethical theory. Somebody could be a little bit disoriented by the fact that taxation is clearly a violation of the non-aggression principle. Like, you go to somebody with a weapon, give me your money, or I throw you into jail, or I kill you if you resist. Inflation is more subtle. We will discuss it. But it is also a violation of non-aggression principle, because it only works if you impose the legal tender or the inflated money and you create a monopoly. Otherwise, people will just migrate to another form of asset as money. So you cannot do inflation without monetary inflation without violence, and we will discuss that. While apparently government borrowing seems like the more free market version of financing the war, because the government here is not forcing anybody. Apparently, they're just going there with a proposal like, would you like to borrow me some money and I will give you back with interest? You can choose. So it seems like the most free market option among the three. But it's tricky, because the point is that basically the three, we will discuss that, but they interact with each other a lot. For example, the government may borrow in a free market condition, but then use inflation in order to monetize the debt and basically scam the creditor out of their money. And they may use taxation in order to impose you to escape from some kind of wealth tax, because maybe they are going to tax your capital gains or from something, but not from state treasury. And so you will move to state treasury in order to protect yourself. In many countries, like state debt is protected by taxation, unlike other forms of debt. So these conflicts with private firms is often uses taxation in order to unfairly compete, and also uses inflation in order to unfairly dilute. So they work very well in
tandem.
In tandem.
And isn't there a moment, an issue when the Bank of England, was it in 1914 or I don't know when, they started to emit some government bond and nobody wanted to buy it, so they bought it themselves in a way, and that was actual inflation, wasn't it?
Well, yeah, they even now, most like even the Fed right now with quantitative easing and TARP, basically the central banks are basically buying directly or indirectly. They're just buying treasury bills to some degree, or sponsoring fake private crony capitalist actors in order to pay treasury bills. So it's still the same. And and many episodes in the past in which government borrowing was so. A very important point that Ulrich make was the increased level of distortion of the market. So taxation creates some distortion. government borrowing even more, and inflation we will see even more. But also the second point is how sustainable it is to go on forever. So taxation, you can push it, but then you have a population which is also probably armed because you have to give them guns to fight the war, and then they are people with guns angry at you for taxation, so they will react. Government borrowing, the market will react very easily. They will just stop lending you money because it's too much and you're not credible anymore in giving it back, so they will just stop. While inflation is unstoppable. So that's also the degree of the scale you can go on with this kind of tool is way higher than the previous tool.
Yeah, it's totally masked. It's hidden, right? So, Oli, did you want to?
Yeah, sure. You have to understand how total warfare works, because when you are in total warfare mentality, when you are driven by ideology, let be like during World War One and nationalist ideology, during World War II, Nazism, communism, etc., you are not going to see your enemy as a human being. You just want to destroy it. You just want total annihilation of the enemy, unconditional surrender, and so on. So you want to push the war until the enemy is totally destructed. There is a mentality and ideology in total warfare that you don't see in traditional warfare. And this is why money is used to push on beyond reasonable war goals. So this is important because both are linked. Ideologies, totalitarian ideologies, are fueled by fiat money. And so this is important. I just wanted to say that. Inflation is also important because you are hiding the cost of war to your population, because if you are only using taxation or borrowing to finance the war, you are going to get unrest. People are not going to be happy. The interest rates are going to be very high. So the private sector is going to have a lot of bankruptcy going to happen, and your economy is going to be in shambles very quickly. But you don't want that. You want to push the war as far as possible because the end goal is the destruction of the enemy. So you are going to use fiat money, inflation, to create an illusion for your population that the war is not as destructive as it may seem. So people are going to die on the battlefield, on the battlefront. Resources, consumer goods, tanks, etc., are going to get destroyed, but the money is going to be unchanged. So the interest rate are going to be unchanged, and the signal that you are sending to your people is that everything is fine. So don't worry about it. The economy is still working good. So people live in a disillusion, like everything is fine because the price are fine, because the price signal is totally distorted, even though there is a big misallocation of resources, and then even though the type reference is very high, so the capital structure is going to deplete itself quite rapidly during the war. But as long as you maintain prices that are fake, people are going to believe it until the end. And there's one thing that always strikes me in history, is that at the end of the Second World War, Germany, the monetary system of Germany, the Reichsmark, didn't fail until the end of the war. So the money was always considered sound by the population until the end, because they used it as a veil, as a cost concealing device, as Serrano said in chapter 9, to blind people into thinking that the war is not making them poor, in a sense.
So you're making the distinction between, you're describing inflation as the increase of the money supply, whose effect in terms of loss of purchasing power is kind of deferred in time, right? It doesn't happen immediately, right? So it's more socially tolerable. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Because when you Giacomo, I think, can also answer that, but you have to understand one thing about Australian economics is inflation, so money printing, doesn't increase prices at the same level everywhere. So money printing is going to make, let me give you an example. If you double the sum of money in society, not all the prices are going to be doubled immediately, because the money you are going to print is going to make ways in the economy through certain roads. During wartime, when you are printing money, you are going to give the money to the war industry, so armaments, munition, etc. So the firms that are going to trade those goods, the consumer goods, are going to get the money first. So they are going to get richer. When you get richer with inflation, it means that you get the new money printed first, and you still are benefiting from the ancient price of the markets of the goods.
Yeah.
So you can buy goods with new money, but the price of those goods has not yet increased. But they are going to increase because you are going to buy those goods, and
gradually,
there's more money, and as money is going to gradually spread in society, the new money is going to be reflected in the price of consumer goods, obviously.
I think you can visualize this phenomenon. This is basically the Cantillon phenomenon, and you can visualize it as a sort of wave. So basically, when you put a stone in a body of water, you will have this wave propagating. So if I take the same amount of money existing in society, I print the same amount, so I double the money supply, and I give everything to Ulrich. Now, the prices around the world are not changed because all the distortion is just in his house. But now, if he wants to change his life in any way with the new money, he will start to buy an helicopter and to buy a new mansion and stuff like that. So now, even the people around him, they will benefit more because all the people interacting with him will have a richer client with higher pays and with stronger demand. So people will benefit. They will suffer a little bit of increased price because maybe the barber shop of Ulrich will also suffer the price of the restaurant next to Ulrich's house, but the advantage will be more than the disadvantage. And then you have to imagine this kind of circle expanding around the center of the money printing, and there is some equilibrium level in which the total gain from the new free easy money is totally compensated by the rise in general price. And then outside of this circle, everybody's losing. The person which is closer to the money printing, it has a net gain. The person which is farther away has a net loss, and the total amount is a negative sum gain. Is not a zero sum gain, because in the process you distorted the price signal, and you distorted the structure of production. So you also created the global damage. And I think this is very important to imagine, because there's also a trick in order to explain why inflation is not happening. For example, in the current world in the US, you print money, you give this money to basically to the stock market, you give this money to companies. Now you create this index of prices which doesn't include the stock market. So you say, oh, look, inflation is only at 6%. Of course, the stock market increases by 200% this year, but that's just because companies are going so well that they are more valuable. So you can localize, you can print money, push it in some market. In that market, prices will skyrocket, but before they reach other markets, that will take some time, like some kind of osmosis. And you can see that the government is putting money mostly in stock market, education, healthcare, and military expenses. And in those sectors, the amount of inflation, of price inflation, is matching very closely the amount of monetary inflation. While in the other sectors, it takes more time. There are also other tricks. One trick is to export inflation from a geopolitical point of view. For example, if you print a lot of money and you give that to Americans will go abroad and buy more stuff. So inflation will be exported to other countries with the Cantillon effect. And then you can also have more stupid tricks, but they work. For example, you can start saying that 2% inflation of prices is zero. and 1% is deflation actually. So you can say, so look, we are in deflation because price inflation is only 1%. So you can just reframe the zero, and one could ask, why are not the market agent rational enough to see? The point is that no, that there is information asymmetry, and there is an opportunity to scam people for many people for a very long time, especially if the feedback loop to learn from the scam is very, very large. So if you scam people about the fact that about something very easy to see, you will see a lot of people understanding the scam very soon. If your scam is very indirect, like a prestige with a lot of middle passages and indirect exchanges, you may be able to, like even now, if you ask to an average person why are price increasing, many of them will tell you that it's capitalist greed of price gouging or stuff like that. So the scam works.
Yeah. All right. So we've looked at 3 ways to finance the war: taxation.
May I stop you there just for another
Yes.
second? It's so I read this book at this point probably 7 years ago, and for the occasion of tonight, I reread very quickly chapter 9 when you told me that it was about chapter 9, and I noticed something that I didn't notice before. Salerno is mentioning 3 methods for financing a war: taxation, borrowing from the public, and monetary inflation. And then he says governments may also resort to coercive requisitioning, that is confiscating the material, which is funny because actually he describing 4 different methods. And rereading, I was understanding that actually this 4th method is subtly different from the others. Somebody may say that it's just another form of taxation because I'm just confiscating your stuff, but it's not exactly the same. It's trickier, and probably I guess that probably Salerno may have rephrased the incipit to say there are actually 4 ways, and they all subtly interact with each other. But yeah, of course, inflation is the focus that we're going to have.
And the first taxation and the last one you mentioned are the ones that are probably more tangibly felt, because they can see it, they can feel it in their body, they're being taken their stuff. While the other one, and particularly inflation, are more hidden. They've got more long-term effects probably as well.
Yeah, Salerno makes a case that actually taxation is less hidden. Is less hidden than confiscation, because the points he makes is that with taxation you talk about money, so you have to. It's easy to calculate how much money the government is asking, and you ask it for everybody because you can easily calculate the total tax revenue of the government. Well, not easily, but you can calculate it. While if you do confiscation or forced proposal of your industry, that's subtle because you don't. It's hard to calculate in an objective way how much resources is the government taking from each member of society. So in a way, it's a middle ground of hidden between monetary taxation and government borrowing. It's still taxation, but it's harder to calculate economically, which is a very interesting point.
Okay.
Yeah, and it is not as efficient. And so,
yeah, right.
So we've looked at how war is redirecting all efforts to to consumption goods, is shortening the structure of capital. We've looked at different ways to finance the war. Now we're talking about war economy as the road to economic fascism. Can you tell us about this, Giacomo?
Sure. Basically, there is a lot of feedback loop again between money manipulation and war. Money manipulation allows wartime economy to go deeper, to go longer, to go to a higher extreme. You can have total war under a non-sound money system. You cannot have total war. So in a way, there is a monetary distortion helping to fund the war, but then there is also the other way around. War can be an excuse to incentivize, to justify as an emergency monetary manipulation, and it can also be an excuse to hide the consequences. So the point is that there's always been this kind of feedback loop in which monetary manipulation is bringing warfare, and warfare is bringing justification and cover for monetary manipulation. So there is a great match between the negative state of money and the positive state of warfare state. In particular, the points that you are mentioning here is that government interventionism during wartime is easy to impose and harder to cancel after it's finished. So, like I come from Italy. In Italy, when you pay for gas, you are still paying for a special emergency taxes to the conquest of Abyssinia in Africa. So basically, yeah, so you're still paying for that. They still have the same name. So you can impose a new taxes for war, but then to take it back after the war is hard. And then there is the problem of price control, because of course, if there is inflation, people are going to price inflation. So if there is monetary inflation, eventually price inflation will arrive with Cantillon distribution. And then people will complain, and then the government will have to try to fix it by trying to keep price inflation out of some very, very strategic from a public perception point of view markets. So they will have to impose price control. But how can you impose price control if you don't control each shop, if you don't have a police state? How can the government know that a barber shop is cutting your hair with a different price rate than another barber shop if they don't install cameras and spies? So the price control requires society control. That's going into again fascism. Then you have, of course, price control. That there is a good saying which price control is impossible, because there is a price that government can never avoid, which is infinite price, which is basically shortage of the good. So you can cap the price to X, but then the shop can always go to infinite. So basically empty shelves, and which is the opposite of minimum wage. There is a minimum wage, but then you can always go to zero, which is just not hiring anybody. So you cannot escape from these two realities. So price control will also create a shortage, which can be an excuse for rationing. And so you now have the government taking direct control of fundamental resources. And then there is the point about the vampire economy. Basically, the capital structure is consumed, and the society is not anymore able to survive without this kind of parasitic public structure that incammerated all remnants of capitalistic structure. I think there may be some other subtle ways that maybe Salerno is not contemplating directly, because they may be even more modern, more new. For example, when we Bitcoiners discuss about CBDCs, it's interesting that if you have inflation, or if you have, let's say, negative interest rates in banks, then people will want to escape from their bank accounts, for example, and they will want to withdraw cash, because if you have a negative interest rate, if they are going to lose money in the bank account, you want to withdraw money. So in order to prevent you from withdrawing money, you can use the excuses of terrorism or pedophiles or whatever you want in order to impose cash restrictions. And so you see that there is always a connection between messing up money and society reacting to that in rational ways. And then in order to stop society from reacting, you have to impose more surveillance, more censorship, more prevention of movements of capital and people, and we can make a lot of examples.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think this concludes. Uli, you wanted to add something?
The tale of the state, the government thinking they are smart enough to solve the problem they caused in the first place, but they are not, because when you are introducing price control on in an inflationary economy, you cannot control everything, because the producer is still living with inflation, and he has to get materials to make the products, and if he cannot raise the price of the consumer good, it's going to fail. So the government is going to help him by fixing the price of the things he needs to produce the products that is controlled, but it's not going to succeed also. So this is an endless an infernal spiral that is going to land into a planned economy. And as Austrian economics says, The first step of state intervention into the economy leads to economic fascism, as Solano would say, because once you put a grain of salt in the economy by government intervention, the wrong is done, because the government is always going to think they're smart enough to solve the problem by intervening more into the economy, and this paves the way for a planned economy, sadly.
Right. You know, this chapter is really something. Okay, I think we've done a fairly good job, or you've done a fairly good job at really describing, explaining those key notions. It might still be somewhat complex and complicated for some, and I would really recommend to take a look if you're interested. I'm sure some notions have resonated with you. The chapter itself is comprehensible, or it's just going to take a bit of time to go through it, but it's worth, because it's really instructive. There's a lot to learn from this. I think this closes this first part. Now we can move to a very different subject. We can turn our attention to the notion of property. We've mentioned it several times. I mean, it's really at the center of the discussion here, because in wartime, in those violent contexts, your chief priority is going to be to find out the best ways to protect this property, to save it, to preserve against that confiscation, debasement, destruction, etc. So the idea really is we wanted to tap into the expertise of Ulrich. As he said earlier on, is an historian, is specialized in prehistory, but also history, generally speaking, and since he's also passionate for Austrian economy, is looked into these notions of the evolution of the notion of property, and we thought, okay, that might be a good idea to undertake some sort of genealogy of the concept of property. You know, how does it evolve throughout human history? I think it's going to be a much lighter, much more descriptive part, less brainy in a way, and it should be very engaging. So we'll be tracking just the evolution of this concept from prehistorical infancy to its modern expression. Giacomo, do you want to take the floor and sort of prompt and get Uli to share with us his knowledge on the different periods that we're going to go through?
Yeah, sure. I think that it's very interesting that there is a fundamental debate, even among libertarians and Austrian economists. It's between these more rationalistic idea from Rothbard and Hoppe that property rights can be derived from logic itself, and you only have one form of property, basically, which can be rationally defined, which I tend to agree with, or the more Hayekian or Friedmanian idea that property is just some sort of convention that evolved in some ways, but may have evolved in many other ways. And typically, I'm very curious to see your reconstruction of the genealogy of property rights. Most historical reconstruction that I've seen in my life follow the second framework. So it's like people just have resources, and then they figure out ways with trial and error, and some very successful ways to assign arbitrary property titles are these or those. While I think that it would be very interesting to try to match the historical evolution of property rights as the discovery of some logical rules about property, like the homesteading principle. Right. I think that I don't know if you agree with that, Ulrich. Or sorry, I'm pronouncing it in the German way. Sorry. But I don't know if you agree with the more deontological and axiomatic deductive version, but it would be interesting to challenge, to confront that with your reading of historical evolution. So I'm very curious to see the way you go on with the steps.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, I think
you can see it.
Go on, Uli.
Yeah, so I think you can see it both ways. Before talking about private property, maybe you have to consider how yourself should see property. Is it a natural right or is it a legal right? So is property intrinsic with the human being, or is it something that is allowed by the government or other individuals than you? Because how you see property is going to define how you are going to make the genealogy of property. Because if you think property is a natural right, like I think everybody here is thinking, there is no genealogy of property because property is property.
Right.
That's it. So everything that we can tell you about the history of the genealogy of property is from the legal standpoint of view. Is not from the point of view of natural rights. So there's a lot of things that can be said about how
You
property
can
evolved and how we, yeah,
you can do sort
yeah,
of
I'm
a
going to make
genealogy. Sorry, you can do some sort of a
yeah,
genealogy
sure.
of the expressions of property as a political system develop, institutional systems, technology. So there are new dimensions arising with the development of society, and so property takes different shapes. In that sense, you can probably undertake some sort of objective genealogy of property without going into these axiomatic consideration. Now, I tend to agree with you, Giacomo, and I have to say that's one thing I'm sort of struggling with after I discovered Rothbard and the anatomy of states and that sort of thing. Okay, is I understand the logic that you're describing, and we'll come back to it, this natural right, the fact that you own your body, so the instrument that you build with your body is yours, that sort of thing. And I think it's kind of what you're saying. It's an awareness, a deep awareness, maybe some sort of spiritual or logic awareness of the reality of things, which has maybe been discovered by people a long time ago, and that perhaps is spreading as an idea undercurrent and surfaces at certain moments. And I don't know, it has to do with something, some level of shared level of awareness, and it's conflicting with more animal-based reality of predation and control. I don't know, something like that.
Well, I can make a very simple example that can conjugate this natural right proposition with an historical genealogy, which is the discovery of gravity. Gravity is not a convention; it's a fact. It's always existed from first principle of the structure of the universe. But the way people discover gravity changed from Aristotle thinking that the earth element was going to the center, and then actually Galileo trying to measure the acceleration, then Newton coming up with the idea that stuff falling here was the same principle of planets, of Kepler's laws. So there was a genealogy of the theory of gravity and of the engineering of how to use gravity, from trebuchet to moon landing. There was an evolution of theory and engineering, but not an evolution of the fundamental fact. And this may be something similar. We can have a first principle based fact, which is property rights, but we may have a historical evolution of the theoretical understanding of that and of the engineering of the enforcement of that.
All right, let's move on. So let's start with the very beginning, the prehistoric times. What does ownership, what does property look like in this very ancient time?
Yeah, so when you're talking about prehistoric times, you're talking about two eras that are very different from one another. There's the ancient one, which is called the Paleolithic era, and the newest one, which is the Neolithic. So the Paleolithic, the oldest one, is the time when in Europe and in the entire world, Homo sapiens, so ancestors, were mostly hunting and gathering their resources, and they were most of the time nomadic people or semi-nomadic people. So they were living off the land. At the time when, like 20,000 years ago in Europe, the population was very scarce, like only 7,000 people living in what was Europe at the time, and mostly nomadic people. So ownership and property at the time is not known. Obviously, the only way we can grasp it in archaeology is the burial sites, the tombs that we find, and when you see the belongings of the individuals that are going to follow him to death. So you have property, but this property is not well known and is only attached to jewelry or certain kind of objects. So it's very particular. When we talk about the genealogy of property, you have to talk about the other part of prehistory, which is the Neolithic time. So the Neolithic time is from 10,000 years ago up till today, like I like to say. It is the time that people are going to settle, are going to cultivate the land, and they are going to raise cattle to live. And starting from this time period, we are starting to see a hierarchy being put in place, and we are going to see significant signs of property at the time, because when people are going to be sedentary, they are going to acquire land, they are going to settle, they are going to defend this land, because they are going to cultivate the land to get food. They are not going to rely on game to get food. They are going to rely on the land. So when you are going to rely on the land, you have to defend it, you have to cultivate it, you have to work. The notion of work appears at the time of the Neolithic. It doesn't. We don't talk about work during the Paleolithic, but during the Neolithic. And this is very important, because if we touch on this subject later, for philosophers like John Locke or Ayn Rand, the notion of action and work is the definition of property, because this is the life of the work of a life of an individual that is going to touch the objective world, and this is how property is going to be born. So we can talk about it later, but this is starting from the Neolithic era that we identify property with work and with possession. And during this time period, we see hierarchy being put in place. We see a lot of megalithic structure, architecture being put in place all across the world, in Europe especially. And what we find in archaeology is that people that are going to be buried into the architecture, megalithic architecture, are people that are considered to be wealthy. So they were the one with the most belongings and the most property. So what we know is that during the prehistoric time, the notion of property is not well known, obviously, because we didn't write the things, contrary to the Roman times and the modern times. But we know that property was most likely used by a very minority of individuals that were profiting from the work of others.
Okay.
And property is only that, it is what you produce. Okay, so that's what we can say about the most ancient times. When you talk about early civilization, one thing that is very important about early civilization is the advent of writing, because with writing you have codes that are being written and put into place, and you are going to formalize some code of law. The code of law that the legal code of law that are found in Mesopotamia, in the Levant, in the what is today the Middle East, and the birthplace of civilization. They are quite interesting because they are both the first expression of money that are being written, but they are also the first expression of what is property and how people can enjoy their property under the legal system. And at the time, what is very interesting, there is a two example that we put on the slide. The code of Hammurabi is a code that is well known because it was made by a king of Babylon, so the second millennium BC. And there's a lot of things that a lot of article of law that was put into this code. There's 82, I think, in total. So it is very wide because this code of law is telling children have to behave with their parents, but they are also telling people how they can inherit property from other people. So, like if you are a woman, you cannot inherit from your husband, etc., etc. So this is put into law, or how you can have access to your property, and how you can pass it on to other people. So this is quite interesting because this is the first manifestation of a state, a third party, as we can say, how they are going to tell you how you can use your property. And we can talk about it later, but when you have the first emanation of this, when you can delegate your property, when you can lose your property, is it really your property? This is something we can talk about later. And Egypt and Mesopotamia are pretty similar with the state owning land, temples, and because at the time the state is very linked to religion, to the land, and people don't own land like they are going to do during the Greek and the Roman time, mostly.
Right. Hey, Giacomo, feel free to interject anytime. I know it's your passion, this archaeology, and this particular subject, I'm sure, is dear to you. So feel free to interject, add whatever.
Just a few comments. I think that for later, especially when we will talk about Bitcoin later, it's very important to note this very strong connection between property and labor from one point. So we could say the labor theory of property, which is not the same as the labor theory of value of Smith and Ricardo. So property is connected to labor, and this is similar to the concept of proof of work in Bitcoin in a way, which is very interesting. And that's a very important point. Locke, Rand, again, other people, especially John Locke, was probably the first to formalize the fact that property is the factual connection between human action, human labor, and the result, the output of the human labor. So everybody basically recognized that instinctively since the beginning of history, but it was formalized pretty recently. And then the second strong connection is between property and speech. Like we were discussing how property became it became easier to analyze in the context of the written documents. But it's also important because while appropriating something, so homesteading something, is just a matter of working on that. And Robinson Crusoe can do that on his own island alone. It doesn't need to be recognized in order to appropriate something physically. But then the transfer of property, so the market, the contract, requires a concept of the possibility to alienate your property, to give it to somebody else. And you can give it to somebody else conditioned that somebody else will do something for you in exchange. So now you have a contract. And you cannot have contract without a form of speech. So that blurs the line a little bit, because while work, like changing nature with your action, is fairly objective, you have objective actions. A contract is based on language evolution, is based on the fact that people can understand each other, is based on, to some degree, to social convention. Even if I'm a believer of property rights as an abstract thing, the practice of contracts depends of a lot of social context. Let's imagine that you enter a cafe, you buy a coffee, and then after you drink it, the bartender will tell you, oh, by the way, the price was your life. Now you are assuming that there is a lot of implicit contracts, implicit conventions that are basically going to require mutual understanding. So this is very, very interesting, I think. And the other interesting thing is the use of state-owned here. I think I know what is intended, and I agree. But I think that when we talk among libertarians, this is tricky, because the word state that we use, especially to indicate the modern nation state, is actually a bastardization of the original word for property, which was basically a state. So we had this concept of land property that was an estate, and then the state for basically all over the Middle Ages was just land property. And so Ludwig von Haller, for example, is a historian and jurist, a Swiss one, who made the case, for me a very convincing case, that most of the feudal order of the Middle Ages was about private property, actually. And the concept of state back then was just the concept of private property of land. And then it was only the modern version of the word that transformed the concept of property in this concept of political hierarchy and military hierarchy. So in a way, the fact that in Egypt and Mesopotamia, all the property was state-owned is kind of tautological, because the word we're using for state back then mostly meant land property in a way.
All right, but we're going to be traveling those different stages. I think we're soon going to be in medieval time. In the meantime, we're spending a bit of time in Greece and antique Rome. What do you want to say about this period, Uli?
Yeah, so I think Greece is one thing, Rome is another. The Roman law we're still today deeply influenced by Roman law, at least in Italy and France, as you can say. But between the two, we can say that the Roman law, they developed property law that is very interesting, because they also they develop a way, what was called usufruct in Latin. So this is the way of using a land, using a property without owning it. And this is something that is very unique to Roman law. And this is something that we still have today in our code of law. Like you can enjoy a property of another without having the need of owning this property. The only caveat to that is that you cannot change the property beyond what the owner wants. And this is very important, because it shaped how the Roman economy worked for centuries. And some Austrian economists, like I know Mises in Human Action, talked a bit about the Roman Empire, and how this kind of how the Roman law, how it was shaped and how it protected property and the use of property among individuals. It was the base foundation for the division of labor and the specialization of competence that we saw across the Roman Empire, and what made the might of the Roman Empire. And there's also another thing about Roman law that was called dominium, which was absolute property of a land, of a good by some individual. And during the Roman Republic and then the Roman Empire, there were a class of individuals, the patricians, that were very wealthy, and they used to own dominion. And this led to the domains that led to the medieval times after that, to the feudalism that we're going to talk about. And those domains were very interesting, because they not only own the land, they also own the labor that worked the land. And this is interesting because they did not only own the land property, but also the labor that was put into place by people working the land. So it was very something that was very interesting during the Roman time, and some may say it was what made Rome an empire, and it was also what led Rome into its destruction, because during the Roman time we had a lot of inflation of money, a debasement of coins, of coinage, Roman coinage, and the concept of dominion was bastardized at the end of the empire, because the people working the land were no longer free, because before that they could left the dominion to go elsewhere. But at the end, the more the money was debased, the more the emperor intervened in the economy, and they even forced people to stay on domains, and the job was passed on generation, because people were seeking to flee, but they couldn't, so they put a control of individuals, and they totally changed all the law work. So, well, this is quite extensive, so I don't know if we mean to go into more detail, but yeah, Roman law is very important, because it's still what the Western legal tradition is still very influenced by today.
Yeah.
I think an important point to make about this last discussion about dominion is the general point about slavery. So can people be considered as property? I think that even if slavery always existed also in Egypt, like the the Bible, the biblical histories about slavery in Egypt or Babylonia, or even I guess in the Hindu civilization, Indo-Valley civilization, and everywhere. But in a way, we know for the role of slaves in Egypt, for example, has recently been rediscussed a lot. While we know for sure that in Greek city-states, the role of slaves was very important, and in Rome as well. So I think that's already something that can be compared to, for example, to the Middle Ages that you will address after. Well, I will comment this after, but I just want to anticipate that there is, for example, an entire class of thinkers, especially Christian thinkers like distributed thinkers like Belloc and Chesterton with the servile state, but also Von Haller, and to some degree also Rothbard in Austrian perspective on economic, of a history of economic thought, that are basically considering slavery as the practice of slavery as a vulnus in the conception of property rights that was later partially fixed with the servitude in the Middle Ages, that gradually shifted from slavery into something closer to some kind of contractual agreement of protection.
All right.
Yeah.
Let's move to medieval time, actually. So we're moving into
this is quite
serfs now.
when I was a student, my specialty was not prehistory. At first, it was medieval times and modern times. And the feudalism is something very, very interesting, because today people, when they think about the Middle Age, the medieval time, they think of a society that was not very advanced and with very few individual rights and property rights. But as Giacomo said, there's a lot to talk about feudalism and how the land was worked and how work was considered by the hierarchy at the time and the state at the time. You have to understand that during the medieval time, and this is very different from the Roman period and the Carolingian period, which is the beginning of the Middle Age in Europe. Something happens is that charges like both religious and temporal were passed on generation. So you have lordship that are going to appear, and even some bishops are going to pass on their charges of bishop to their son, etc., etc. So you have this notion of heritage, of to give to your son your political or religious status, which did not really exist before that time. So that's something that is very, very interesting, because property is going to be multi-generational, beginning with the Middle Age. And when a lord or the church owned the land, they did not own slaves in Western Europe, contrary to Eastern Europe, but they allowed people to work the land for them. And the serfs, or the peasantry of the time, they were relatively free people in the sense that they could leave the land they were working on. And this is very different from how dominions used to work at the end of the empire, the Roman domains, because people were captive of the land. They couldn't leave. And this is very, very interesting and very, very important to say, because during the medieval time, people were more free than they used to be at the end of the empire, and how they were later on, like during the Industrial Revolution or times like that. There's also one thing that we talked about the early civilization, is that during the medieval time, at least in the archives I used to work on, there were a lot of contracts between the lords owning the land and the peasantry working the land. And oftentimes those contracts were put on the equal footing between the two. When you have a peasant, a serf, what we call in French a métayer, I don't know the English word for that, when they are going to enter in a contract with one another, they are going to be put on the equal footing. So this is interesting. And what is very interesting is that the serf has to maintain the land of the lord, but the lord also have obligation to the serfs. So you have to protect him because he's enjoying the labor of the peasant. So there is a contract about the protection, like the peasant is giving his property to the lord, his work, but contrary, but in exchange, he's going to get something, and something is safety. And this is how feudalism is considered mostly, how we study it in France, is mostly a contractual exchange between a lord and the peasantry based on contracts, based on its kind of equality of a partnership between the peasantry and the lordship. So this is quite interesting, I think. And so for the other thing, it is. It depends of the time period, because the Middle Age is something that is very long, it's 1,000 years old. So beginning with the end of the empire and the discovery of America, so 1,000 years. And the law and how property was considered during the time changed quite a bit. But what you have to, I think, to keep from that is that the feudal times were mostly, the peasantry was enjoying the fruit of his labor in a way that was not seen in Europe before during the Roman Empire. That's how we can put it in a way.
All right.
I think that Middle Ages are very interesting because they are a point in which I think a libertarian and Austrian perspective on history requires some kind of revisionism, historical revisionism, compared to the mainstream notion of the period. I grew up with, like many people listening to us, I guess, I grew up with the idea that there was the great classical antiquity, like Roman civilization. Then there was the dark ages of Middle Ages, where everything was bad and dark and everybody was dying of Black Death and poor. And then there was the Renaissance, especially in Italy, but also in French. Renaissance was when people rediscovered the greatness of the classical past. That was my upbringing. While the first time I had some doubts on this vision was reading again Belloc, the Servile State, in which he was making the point that it was actually the opposite, and many part of the good things of Renaissance actually were the direct consequences of the scientific and social discoveries of the feudal period, and many of the problems of the feudal period were actually the fallout of the problem of the centralization of the late Roman Empire. So the trouble created by the centralized classical times were actually responsible for many of the bad things, and the Middle Ages were actually responsible of many of the good things of the so-called Renaissance, including innovation in arts and science. Then I read Rothbard, again, Austrian economy, Austrian perspective on economic thought before Adam Smith, Volume 1. You can get it free from Mises.org, just like Money, Sound and Unsound. And you can read Rothbard on Middle Ages, which I think is very, very interesting. Then there is an Italian author, which is Guglielmo Piombini, specialized in this. I think, I don't know if he has been translated, but very, very interesting as well. Then I got to read, I don't remember who it was, but the libertarian thinkers about medieval Ireland. So the Tuatas, that basically are a form of non-territorially contiguous kingdoms, with the Brehon law, which is something which is the closest possible to a pure free market order we can imagine, where you could actually join a kingdom with your property at distance. So you can join different kingdom from non-territorially contiguous. And then there is the discussion by, I think, David Friedman about medieval Iceland, with the whole thing and the things. And then I finally discovered von Haller, which is very unknown. Again, Ludwig von Haller, but is incredible because it basically makes the point that feudalism basically means contractualism. Feudal is like built on top of trust-based contracts. So it's a very interesting period for libertarians, I think, and Austrian thinkers. And I think that the way it's presented is upside down, mostly for two reasons. One was scientific propaganda, like intentional propaganda during the Enlightenment. So there was like the black legend of the Middle Ages. So people like Voltaire and others making up stuff like most of the things we associate with the Middle Ages, like Ius Prima Noctis, all this stuff were like historical fakes that has been built in the late 18th century. And then there is also some kind of less intentional and more natural bias, which is the fact that it's hard to understand chaotic and rich and diverse things. It's easier to understand centralized things. So when we think, for example, when we study history, if we think about one ruler controlling everything top down in a very centralized way, that's easy to understand. So it sounds ordered to us. While if we think about something more various, like the Middle Ages were very polycentric. If you were a peasant, of course, you didn't have much power or influence or control over your life, but you had a lot of competition for justice, for example, because usually very close to your maybe you were in the territory of one king, but very close there was another king, and then very close there was an abbot, which was not the king, depending directly from the church, and then there was the bishop of the secular church, and there was the abbot of the spiritual orders that were often independent from the bishop and the secular church. They were both depending from the pope, but then you had the imperial free cities, and then you have the cities in general, the towns. So you had the Templar Knights. You had a lot of polycentric structure. You didn't have the state, the cop with the weapons. You had a lot of different structure, which creates a lot of interesting opportunity for freedom, but also a lot of complexity. So when you think about that, it just seems like chaos. So if you ask people which thing lasted more in time, the Roman Empire or the Irish Brehon law that I described before, and they will probably tell you, well, the Roman Empire seems something like solid, something standing, ordered. Well, it's the other way around. The Brehon law, in this kind of polycentric law in Ireland, lasted 1,000 years basically until the Norman conquest, and the Roman Empire was way shorter in time. So it's very interesting. I think that the Middle Ages is something that I would urge our listeners to really reevaluate from an Austrian and libertarian perspective.
Excellent. Let's move on. We are actually reaching this period of Renaissance which has produced a lot of fake history, as you suggest, right? And basically, yeah.
So the Renaissance.
Yep. Just a bit conscious of time. It's 2 hours 30.
Sure.
I think we need
to make another one.
Yeah, but the medieval time is very interesting because you could vote with your feet, which is everything that you need. So the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, we can go a little bit quicker if you want. But the one thing you have to keep from that time period is John Locke. That's pretty much what you have to keep, because John Locke is the one that redefined how property works, how we can still think about it today. Because before, at the beginning of the talk about property and the genealogy of property, I talked about Locke and Rand, of course, because both of them are very linked, and they redefine property with the individual. Property, to put it simply, comes from the individual of the person, as long as the person enjoys his life to the fullest, so the freest life that he can have. If he can own the body, and if he's allowed by other individual and the state to pursue his way to happiness, is pretty much everything that he needs, because the work is going to perform, the labor that is going to perform is going to create property, in a sense, because property is going to spring from what is going to do with the world, with his reason. That's how Rand pretty much said that with our philosophy, objectivism. Everything starts with the human reason, with right to life, pretty much. And from the right to life and the right to work, there's property that is going to be derived from that. And Locke also talked about something that is that is interesting. He talked about mixing labor, which is when someone is going to add his labor to an object. Is going the object is going to become his property because he's going to shape it to his will. And as long as you work the land, or as long as you shape an object, you are going to own it. It's going to be your property. And this is how Rothbard talked also about property. When Rothbard talked about, like, Columbus, for instance, arriving in the Americas in the late 15th century, Columbus didn't have the right for the land because the land was already worked by people, and the true owners of the land were the ones that were working it, pretty much. So this is what to put it quickly is what you have to, I think, to grasp from the Enlightenment is pretty much John Locke that put the emphasis on the individual, and our property was not given by a state to someone or by tradition or by the right of birth, but was something that comes from the individual, from life. And Locke is also very interesting and very different from someone like Rand, because for Locke, everything is mixed with religion and obligation to God, because everything was given by God, obviously. And Ayn Rand was pretty different in our approach about property. So yeah, I'm just going to say that to be quick about it. But I think we can talk about Locke and Rand for a long time if we need to.
And yeah, there was the notion that the growth of trade imposed more formal property, right? Intellectual property,
of course,
patents, copyright.
Yeah, of course. At the time, property is also going to be about something that are not material, like the like intellectual rights, patents, copyrights, etc., are going to appear at this time period. And this is something interesting, like when we talk about Bitcoin also, because property can also be exerted on something that is not tangible. This is very important, and this appears during this time period also. Yeah.
This is also a potentially controversial part that can be extended, not now, but can be expanded on in another roundtable. Because, for example, much of modern Austrian libertarian thinkers like Kinsella and Hoppe are very much against the concept of intellectual property as something, because it's not scarce, so you cannot establish rivalry. And part of this debate is also based on historical revisionism. So is it true that it was patents bringing on the commercial revolution? Maybe yes, but if yes, at what cost? What is what you cannot see of the imposition of copyright and patents, which also connects with the Bitcoin ideology of open source, like connected with the free software ideas of Stallman's and other. So yeah, this is also another pretty deep rabbit hole.
Yeah. We move to industrial revolution, toward modern times.
Yeah, well, the modern times, this is where the notion of property is going to be more materialistic with the advent of Marxism in the 18th century, obviously. So, what can we say last? The 19th century is pretty interesting because there's a lot of technological advance at the time. There's a lot of the structure of capital is going to be more complex. There's going to be way more capital goods that are going to be involved in the production of consumer goods and in global output of the economy. And at the time, you have people, philosophers like Marx, that are going to say that property is derived from labor, for example, and they are also going to emphasize to put the.
What did you say, value or property? Value is derived from
Well,
labor.
interestingly, for Marx, is both, because
Yeah.
he's building on top of Smith and Ricardo's theory of value in order to argue that the capitalist is stealing value from labor, because there cannot be value in entrepreneurial risk because it's not labor itself. So the misconception about property is about value is used to build a misconception about property. So you cannot own something if you're not the worker, but you cannot own capital, basically. You can
Okay.
only own the tools of your labor.
Right.
Yep. Yeah.
Anything you want to add on this one?
No,
No?
not really. Not really. No.
Let's move on and reach the digital age with the rise of digital property, software, digital media, and data become valuable assets with the emergence of concepts like digital right management. I mean, I don't know anything about that, really. I mean,
I would
I'm
define
not.
all these.
Yeah, I'm not an expert on that either. But the only thing I need to say is that how you put property on something that can be copied.
Precisely. Yes. This is very interesting because like patents, but even more, all these digital right management things is based on the assumption that you need the state to. It's just like price control. In order to really enforce this kind of stuff, you have to assume a very deep and extended surveillance on private action of individuals and some kind of super monopolist of force. So before Bitcoin, none of the property schemes that has been discussed in the digital world were anyhow self-enforceable or sustainable without the
right.
strong government intervention, which I think is very telling about the rational the rational foundations of these so-called properties. So I guess that the slide about the 20th century is really only complete in a positive sense when you actually add Bitcoin to the picture, even if Bitcoin is 21st century, 21st. But
Right.
Yeah, the 20th century is not interesting.
So yeah, so actually we've tracked the evolution of private property. I mean, that was deep. That was really deep for me. I can see that you guys are both familiar with all these periods and what's happening. For me, it's really it's a steep learning curve for me. It's extremely interesting, however. So I think we've seen how, you know, through the evolution of the institution, the culture, the political structure in place, property has evolved in its form and modalities, and it seems like technology is and commerce also play a huge role in this. Here we have modern expression of property. So I think it's probably, I think those are not exclusive dimensions, right? It's just so there's this I don't know what really we can gain, what sort of insight we can gain from this.
Well, I think that what we can do is to understand that physical property is about scarcity and rivalry of consumption. You cannot consume one thing at the same time of somebody else for two different purposes. So there is this kind of inner limitation of nature, which is scarcity, basically. If I do something with this, you cannot do the same with the same thing. So our use is going to be mutually interfering, while legal property is about power and arbitrary decision. I can tell you that if I can tell you that your body is my property and you're my slave, and you can find a lot of legal theories to justify these. For example, you can use the theory of democracy and the majority, but then one can make the case than if you are in a park at night with a girl and 3 rapists, and you have an election about property rights, the body of the girl will become property of the rapist because they are majority. So you have the majority rule that was one principle, or you can have other principle. You can have a theocracy with religious principles or whatever. Then digital property seems like something trickier because, as we said before, on one way, virtual real estate are just about arbitrary decision. For example, you participated to Second Life. I think that a very interesting point is the study of property in video games. That's very, very interesting. For example, Second Life in the early 2000s, you could own stuff, but it was always scarcity that was artificially created by the central controller of the platform. So by definition, in the digital world, digital means that what is digital? Instead of analog computers, you have electronic digital computers that are created for just one purpose, to make it easier to copy information and to correct error, basically. So in the digital world, copying is zero cost, and that or very low cost. That's the definition of digital. So how can you, in a world characterized by the easiness of copying, having scarcity and rivalry of consumption? I have a JPEG, I give you the JPEG. Now we both have the JPEG, which is not even a variant. It's the same JPEG down to the single bit. We have the same thing. So you have 2 ways of having digital scarcity. One is artificial. So the controller, somebody who has an asymmetric control on the platform, will pretend that there is scarcity. So you have a house in Second Life. Technically, you can have a second house which is identical, but the game provider like Lindell Labs or whatever, they will prevent you from that with their power over the game, over the platform. Or Google will do it, or Microsoft will do it, or Facebook will do it, which is the same as
artificial scarcity.
Artificial scarcity. Well, Bitcoin, for the first time, is an example of digital natural scarcity, in the sense that it is artificial, in the sense that it is designed, but it doesn't require any kind of arbitrary enforcement by an higher authority. It's a cooperative game in which we are on the same field, but still our behavior converges over a rivalry of consumption. If I spend this UTXO, you cannot spend it, because otherwise we break the scheme. So it is actual rivalry, just like in physical property. So I would say that Bitcoin is physical, at least in this sense. So this is a very interesting debate. Bitcoin is not clearly, I think that Bitcoin is not legal property in the technical sense. You can have an ETF or a MicroStrategy share, and that's legal property. But if you have control over private keys, so you really have Bitcoin, that's between digital and physical, because it is as naturally scarce as physical, but it's also in the digital realm, which makes it easier to transfer, for example, or to hide or to protect.
Yeah, there's a direct peg to energy, so to physical reality, and there's no legal aspect to it other than the social recognition, gradual recognition that indeed it is a property. So it's society is recognizing little by little, and you don't need to have a law for it, just people see it, so it becomes a norms, right?
Yep. Even if the law is telling that, even if the law of any country is claiming possession of Satoshi Nakamoto's, or this is similar to Craig Wright's situation. The fraudster Craig Wright go into a court saying, you court have to decide that those Bitcoin are mine. But the system doesn't care. Even if the court gave a reason to Craig Wright, still the protocol doesn't care. If you cannot sign, the economic incentives are such that people will not recognize the property transfer. And as you say, this goes back to John Locke, basically, because what is Bitcoin? What is a Bitcoin? It's a fraction of proof of work. So it's basically a fraction of homesteading principle, the proof that you did mix your labor with something, that you spend some effort, plus the proof of transfer. So the chain of signatures that from the original worker, the original miner, transferred this title to somebody else. And Bitcoin is in a sense the total abstraction of Lockean principles of homesteading and contract. So the transaction is a contract, and the Coinbase is an homesteading act.
Yeah. And here we got a very nice slides too that shows key dimensions and tensions marking the evolution of property. So we have tension between ownership and use rights. We have tension between the physical and the abstract. We have a tension between the individual and the collective. And there's a move towards increasing formalization, as well as what is it? Economic
Structures.
Function.
Economic function.
Yeah.
I think that something we don't have the time to dig into right now, but it would be interesting for future debates, is between the communal to private, individual to collective, and prehistoric communal use. I think that's another rabbit hole, in the sense that many people have a very naive understanding of property, especially land property, as in, I own this land, so I own everything that comes up to this land, like the cone that goes to the star and to the center of the planet. This kind of geometric view of property. While most ancient systems, and still even now the most common law systems, they use this concept of bundle of sticks. So you don't own like, for example, a field. You own different uses of the field based on your appropriation. If you build a road, you now own a passage right. But if you plant some seeds, now you own an harvesting rights on the same. So you don't own a place like a geometrical sphere. You own some causal fruits of some action, some causal chain. And that kind of, surprisingly, that's a more elaborate view of property than the naive one. But historically, that was also what was developed by most customary rules around the world. And in a way, it was reverted back during the beginning of the modern period. For example, with the enclosures in England, where there were these properties where some family had inherited the right of passage, some other family the right of disposal of waste, some other the right of harvesting. While the King of England arrived and they said, now wait, let's enclose this. This is only of this noble family, and they own like the dominion that we were talking about before. And this created,
the difficult thing with this other approach, use-based approach, is that you may have some competing uses that may not coexist well together, right? So how do you administer this?
Well, that is where you go back to the property right definition. So it's not a solution to that, but you limit the definition of property to those specific conflicts. So the concept of property applies where there is rivalry. So if both cannot pass, then one has the passage right and the other should not have it. And homesteading principle and contracts will define who established the right before. If you cannot both eat the same apple, then there will be conflict. But in all the cases in which there is no conflict, like if you have the passage right in a common which is not conflicting with the harvesting right, then you can keep both. And societies were keeping both until some exceptions, like enclosures, in which the government intervened and basically distorted the incentives by saying, now wait, everything must be, it was again artificial scarcity. There were people going to the same land with different uses, and then the government stepped in and said, you cannot do that. You must, the land must be of this or this. And this actually created the problems of all the dispossessed people flocking to cities, and then Marxism. Well, even before Dickens' time, you had this kind of new waves of poverty. Well, even John Locke was pretty much connected to the levelers. Levelers were this kind of early libertarians that actually started. They were called levelers because rhetorically they were basically tearing down the edges between the enclosures. So it's very complicated, but it's another rabbit hole. But it's also very interesting to me.
Yeah.
One thing you can say you can see it is what is the role of the state in property? Is property as an individual right beneath the state or above the state? Which is it? If you follow what to make sure individual rights are not are still kept in place, and they are not subordinate, they are not used by the collective. But the collective, the state, has to protect individual rights. So there is a. It depends how you put the state and his mission in the equation, I think. And when it comes to Bitcoin, and I think if you consider property as a fundamental right, I think Bitcoin is the first kind of property that is fully compatible with the view of property as a fundamental right that is linked to human life, because you don't need a third party to use your property. Some Bitcoiners say that you are your Bitcoin. As long as you memorize your seed phrase, you are your Bitcoin. So your Bitcoin is part of your life. And it follows very closely Ayn Rand's philosophy and Locke's philosophy that property is something that comes from human life. And in that sense, Bitcoin is the first property that is very linked to life, that and no other assets is as linked to human life as Bitcoin, in my point of view, kind of.
Well, that's a nice transition to this slide. That's a nice meme from Star Fury Flame, and it's suggesting that Bitcoin is this apex predator amongst all properties, and it's going to swallow them one after the other, starting by gold, real estate, currencies, arts, etc. So what can we say? I mean, perhaps to conclude this conversation, we've said a lot of things. To what extent does it disrupt modern forms of property? So you've just mentioned one essential reason. I mean, it's so close to our being. But can we go a bit further and say how it disrupts the different forms of property? How does it behave against the key dimension that we've presented before? I don't think we have the time for that. And how can it possibly alter the dynamics of war and violence? And that's the point we wanted to address, I guess, a main point we wanted to address. So perhaps we can start with this. To what extent does it disrupt modern form of property?
Well,
I mean,
I think a very easy frame is that money itself tends to disrupt property, because money is a kind of property, but is also the most malleable kind of property, because if you can, instead of storing one instance of everything you may need in life, you just store money. It's the most liquid capital, and then you just buy stuff when you need it. So owning money during a regime of broken money was impossible or inconvenient, because money was inflated away, was confiscated easily, it was broken. But if Bitcoin fixes money, then Bitcoin goes back to be the most rational choice for capital allocation, because unless you are producing capital goods and then you're specialized, your saving will just stay in money, which is the most liquid kind of capital you can have. So Bitcoin is bringing people back to use money as the fundamental property. And in a way, it's also the second point, very, very rapidly, the way it disrupts the key dimension. I think that we already said that Bitcoin is not really, it's kind of physical. It's between physical and non-physical, because there is proof of work, which is a physical act, and there is the physical scarcity, the physical entropy in private keys. So that there is some kind of virtual. We can say that Bitcoin is digital, but it's not virtual. It is actually less virtual than fiat money. It's like Bitcoin is the de-virtualization of money to a degree. And then you have also this kind of disruption of individual and collective, because now, for example, there is a nice story. So the number 9 in if you print it in the right format with the right number of zeros in front, it's a valid private key for the SecP curve. So the number 9 is did move bitcoins, and the corresponding address received and spent something like a few hundreds bitcoin. So who is the owner of that? Everybody knowing the number 9. So that's an interesting paradox, because it's changing a lot the way we think about private property. If we publish a public key now, everybody who knows the public key in a way can act on the public key. So it is disrupting to some degree this kind of distinctions in many ways. And the last point, I think it's easy because we went very deep with the previous discussion. If unsound money is helping create total war, then going back to sound money is at least undoing the damage of unsound money. So we cannot fix wars forever, but we can at the very least remove the enormous incentive to total war created by unsound money.
Yeah. That's fairly deep. Uli, do you want to add something on that? Do you think, I mean, of course, the scarcity of Bitcoin.
Not really, just,
go on.
yeah, I think, yeah, I agree with what Giacomo said. For the first time in history, people can protect themselves from war, from the seizure of their asset, from the devaluation of money, and this is very important because in war, even if you win the war, you are going to lose. War is always a negative sum game, so it doesn't matter if you win or if you lose, you're going to lose anyway. So, for the first time in human history, you have a tool that we can put our time and energy of our wealth into. This is Bitcoin, and this tool for the first time can be used without the need of a third party. And when I explained the genealogy of property, each time there was a third party. If you wanted to enjoy your property, you needed to go through the state for free. With Bitcoin, you don't have to go through a third party. And this is why I said before that Bitcoin is the first asset in history that is very linked to the notion of property as a natural right that springs from human life. Because in a way, you are your Bitcoin, and I think that's a beautiful way to end this for me.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, it's 3 hours, guys. I wasn't expecting that this adventure would be that long. I mean, the first segment, I really could tell that this is so dear to you. This book, Money, Sound and Unsound, and you were debating or you were discussing each and every aspect. I can see that you've got it in your flesh. Same thing. I thought this genealogy of the concept of property was going to be fairly descriptive and quick, but I mean, you are appropriating these epochs, those periods of time in a way that just historian lovers do. And I think you managed to share this passion fairly well. So I bet this is the sort of content that will be quite interesting for the students of Bitcoin, although quite unexpected in all the subjects that we are addressing. I don't know how it fits within Plan B, network, platform, library, because I bet you have some connection with quite a few courses. And maybe that's the sort of conversation that can get people to step back and take a bit of altitude, looking at this dimension of space and time in a way that that perhaps, the other sort of content doesn't do. But anyway, I'm super grateful for your participation, Giacomo. Next time we do it, I'll try to make sure we find a different tempo, or maybe we try just to embrace a little less, because this is actually maybe 2 or 3 episodes in one. Ulrich, I'm very glad we met, and I'm very glad you could be on stage today and share your love for what you do, and both the in terms of history. To me, I see, the thing is, I was never a guy who liked, who was very much into history. And the truth is, it's only since I've discovered Bitcoin that I found through the money, through this technology, this fundamental technology of money, I found really something that connects me to my ancestor. And that might sound cheesy or whatever, but that's the truth. I mean, this is the story of the evolution of money has helped me reconnect to my forefather and so on. So anyway, I loved it, guys. Thanks a lot. And
Thank you.
and wish you the best. We'll be in touch soon. Bye-bye.